Good morning, everybody. Welcome on. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, meeting called to order. I do want to just give everybody a little bit of forewarning. This might end up being a bit of a shorter meeting. I have to actually hop off at 11, and we are going to go through a couple of things this morning on our decision making and prioritization process, and we're actually going to try to give it a go and see if we can land our first recommendation here today. We're hoping to have a presentation from the budget office as well, just a little bit more information for us as we're starting to look through some of our recommendations that might impact some of the ways that the state does its budgeting assumptions. It'd be good for us to kind of get a sense of some of those underlying processes. There is a chance that we need all the way from now until 11 to do our decision-making prioritization and identify our first recommendation here on the mechanism for ongoing review. If that does take us the full 2 hours, then we won't have time for the budget presentation. So unfortunately, they're not able to go later, and neither am I. So our meeting might be a little bit of a shorter one today, but I think what'll be fun, at least hopefully today, is we start to see ourselves really move into this final phase, practice some of these structures to kind of get us there, see what we like or don't like. And then when we come back in July, we're going to have a solid 3 hours of working through our recommendations, and then hopefully finish that up in August so that our report is ready to go in September. So to kick us off, we'll do a little bit of a shorter, maybe a little roll call today since we're trying to save a little bit of time and get through. So I'm just going to call the folks that I see just for a quick check-in. Hello, and how you're feeling this morning. Let me pull up my agenda. And let's start with Andre. Are you with us today? Okay, Debbie, are you with us today?
Yes, I'm here. Debbie Dennis, Deputy Director at DAS, and I'm feeling well today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Heather. Maybe no Heather yet. Jonathan?
Hi, it's John Grew with OrgDOJ, doing awesome. And yeah, that's it.
Great. Thank you for being here this morning. Tamara, are you with us today?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everyone. I am not feeling 100%, but I am glad to be here and glad that we can work from home when we don't feel 100%.
True. Katrina, are you with us this morning?
Yes, I am. Good morning. Katrina Holland, she, her pronouns. Interim Director of Housing at Urban League of Portland. And I'm doing all right.
Good. Welcome. Welcome. Danish?
Yeah, hi folks, Danish Medora, EM, United Way of Columbia Willamette, and I'm about 5 minutes behind for everything today.
Well, glad you're here.
Yeah.
Felicita.
Good morning, Felicita Monteblanco, she, her pronouns, Public Affairs Manager at Northwest Health Foundation. I'm just fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Bettina.
Good morning, Bettina Shem, Old Mill Center for Children and Family. Pronouns are she and Z. I'm doing good. I went to the gym and I feel energized.
Nice. Marianne.
Good morning. I'm Marianne with St. Vincent de Paul. I'm looking forward to the longest day of the year, which is on the 20th or the 21st.
Yeah. Leah, are you here with us this morning? Or Helen, are you with us this morning? Okay, maybe a couple people out, or maybe they'll join us later. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And then let's go ahead and jump into our public comment. Do we have anybody here for public comment? Okay. Don't see any hands going up or anyone rushing to the mic, to the virtual mic. So if there's no one here for public comment, then I think we'll get into the bulk of our discussion today. Let's see. Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
I see Representative Conrad here. I didn't know if Senator Campos was here.
That's right.
And here comes Leah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Leah. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Representative Conrad, did you want to say hello to the group and check in?
Yes. Good morning. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here, and I look forward to the decision-making process. So thank you very much, Mercedes. Appreciate it.
All right. I am on my small screen today, so I'm going to have to test myself and see how well does my presentation skills go when I don't have my double screens. Let's see. Oops. Nope, it's not working very well. Showing you all a whole lot of boring stuff and not the thing you want to see.
My double screens are broken too, and it's really messing with me.
Let's try that. Are we seeing some slides?
Nope.
Or are we still just seeing my computer?
I'm not seeing anything being shared. I don't know if others are.
Okay.
I don't see anything either, Mercedes. You didn't share. On our end, it doesn't look like you're sharing anything.
Okay, let's try again.
There you go.
All right.
Yep, that works.
So this is our agenda for today. We're going to go through we're going to formalize our decision-making process. So I have a pitch for you all, and I'm happy to take feedback if it's not quite making sense or folks would like to see something a little bit different. Then we'll talk about our prioritization lens, and then we'll actually give it a go and practice and see if we can land a recommendation on our mechanism for ongoing review. So we have 6 buckets of recommendations that we'll be looking at. One of those is the mechanism for ongoing review. During our subcommittee prioritization meetings, I got some feedback that it might be good to start with actually that last one, since it may end up being kind of the container for a lot of our work going forward, knowing that after our recommendations are forwarded, there's still going to be a lot of process around how those things land, what things move forward, and how. I also want to just preview a little bit that that's going to be an additional lens for us to consider when we're looking at prioritization. So just keeping in mind that we are not the final decision makers. We are forwarding recommendations to our decision makers. And so we're really wanting to set this up in a way that gives people who will be reviewing this both on the legislative and administrative side why these things are important, how we think they can be implemented, and what impact that they will have. This is a reminder of our group agreement. So this is something that we had set up towards the very beginning of our process, just to kind of make sure we always had these things to come back to. These will become, I think, more important now in the latter phase of our process as we get into more group discussion. But just as a reminder that we seek to listen to learn and share to advance, take space and give space with intention, strive to be solution oriented, and be welcoming of asking for clarifications and challenging assumptions. Any concerns about the group agreements or anything anyone wants to revisit there? Okay. So then our decision-making process will follow this structure. So the subcommittee discussions were used to create some proposals, which I will be bringing before you. And you'll see what that kind of looks like today with our first set around our mechanism for ongoing review. We'll do some debate and consolidation using a green, yellow, red method. What this means is that we'll bring up a concept and we'll have a discussion around it. And then I will call for a green, yellow, red in the chat. If you're feeling really good about where the discussion is going, you'll put a green. If you're feeling like not so good about where a discussion is going, but you can kind of feel like it's coming to its end, you don't really have too much else to share, you may vote in support, you may not, but you're ready for this to move to the next phase, you'll put up a yellow. If you really don't think that we're done discussing something, we have some critical items that we have not addressed yet, we're definitely not ready for a vote, you will put in a red. And we'll do this a couple of times as like a temperature check. When we get to a point where we have no reds left in our chat is when we'll feel comfortable to actually make a motion. We're going to have just the co-chairs make motions for now, just to kind of consolidate that process. So once we've done enough debate and consolidation of our concepts and terms, that should then produce a single motion that we can put forward for a vote, and then a majority vote does approve. And the majority vote is already in our charter, and so that's why we're using, that's why we're using that. But this process should hopefully allow us to have some good, robust discussion and feel kind of as close to consensus as we will get with a majority vote process. Any questions about how that works? Okay. Then the other thing that we need to discuss today is our prioritization. So as I mentioned when we started, that we are not really making final decisions. We're making final decisions in the scope of what our recommendations will be. But whether or not something is actually implemented and moved forward will ultimately be a legislative or an administrative decision. This will either be something that the departments, the agencies, the governor choose to do, or that the legislature chooses to do. So to help us have a good prioritization framework that is really centered around who ultimately makes the decision making, I'm proposing we use this 4-quadrant process. So this allows us to structure our recommendations around essentially themes that allow people who will make decisions to kind of pick and choose which quadrant they think they would like to spend the most time on. So we have from left to right, things to do now. So this would be things that we kind of think are shorter term or low hanging fruit, things that can be adjusted within existing authorities, knowing again that that's also limited information. We had a lot of questions that we had shared with DOJ, I think trying to help us identify where things might fall into this bucket. For the most part, we've been told we're not going to get answers to those questions, so we're going to have to guess a little bit for some of these things where they fall. But I think if we think about this in terms of things that we think should need to be done really, really soon in order to make their intended impact versus things that can happen later or things that might build upon themselves, we may see some of our recommendations are like a phase one of this recommendation is thing A and a phase two is thing B, which means that recommendations can end up in multiple quadrants. We're also going to be thinking about this in the sense of administrative versus legislative. Again, we're going to have to guess a little bit here. Good thing is we've got a lot of experts in the room who might be able to help us figure out where in these 4 quadrants a recommendation should land. And again, some things may be both. It may require some administrative work. It may also require some legislative work. So things might end up in multiple quadrants. Later on, when we're writing our recommendations, the items that fall into multiple quadrants go to the top of the list. Things that follow into a single quadrant will go to the lower part of the list, more indicating the amount of work necessary to move these things forward, rather than like us picking and choosing what we think is the number one priority. Again, most of that is so that decision makers see themselves in this prioritization rather than seeing our priorities in this prioritization framework. So for example, I just have like some randomly listed things here, right? Recommendation XX, recommendation LL. You can see how the recommendation LL is an example of something that might have a short-term thing to do now, as well as a long-term thing to build on. It is also an administrative and a legislative consideration. And so for this is something that might go towards the top of the recommendation list as something that both the legislature and the administrative side can start doing sooner and can also build on over time. And that's why it's towards the top, because it hits multiple parts of these quadrants, really giving decision makers multiple options for where they want to prioritize. So a legislator, for example, could look at this quadrant and say, I really want to focus on the things that we're doing long term and the things that are strictly legislative. So I'm going to focus on that quadrant for the things that I care about. Right. So it's not really us saying what we think is more important. We're more organizing these in a way that somebody else can identify what's important to them so that they know what they want to move forward using their own kind of framework. Does this make sense to folks? Thoughts or questions? Okay, so we're going to practice a little bit. I'm going to pull this down so I can see all your lovely faces again. Oh no. And now I have 2 team screens and I'm afraid to close either of them. Okay, so I will just deal with that on my side. So to practice a little bit of our process, I would like to utilize the chat. So we are going to take a vote to approve that that is our decision-making and prioritization process. If you feel ready to vote and you think this is a great idea, you're going to go ahead and put just the word green in the box. If you're not so sure, but you're willing to live with it and you're willing to take a vote to, approve it one way or the other, you're going to put a yellow in the box. If you think this is absolutely terrible and we have not had enough conversation about how this is going to go, then I want you to put a red, just the word red in the box.
The chat isn't working for me, but I would have written green.
Thank you also for modeling, Bettina. If you are not able to put something in the chat, just unmute and telling us your color. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm not seeing any reds. We're seeing lots of greens. So now we're going to go ahead and take a vote. So as the chair, I'm motioning that we approve this as our decision-making and prioritization process for our report. If you agree, you write yes in the chat. If you don't agree, write no in the chat. And as Bettina modeled before, if you're not able to add to the chat, please unmute and give us your vote.
Bettina, this is yes.
This is Marianne, and I vote yes. My chat, even though I went out and came back in on the team app, says chat is only available during the meeting.
I struggle with chat too. I can't actually do any responses to anybody's thing, but it's letting me type. So all the fun between the different platforms, huh?
Yes. Thank you all for working through that together. I appreciate that. So that's our confirmation vote there. Looks fairly unanimous that will be our decision-making process, and that will also be what we utilize for our prioritization. So now we're going to give it a go, and we're going to do our first one and see if we can land on a recommendation for a mechanism for ongoing review. And we're going to try to plot it. We're going to try to figure out which quadrant we think that lives in. And this isn't, I also just want to stress, like, I am absolutely a perfectionist. And so I'm having to tell myself this, which is why I keep repeating this to all of you, which is it won't be perfect, right? We're making our best guess. We're making educated recommendations based on our best knowledge. We may not have all of the exact data that we want to have to be able to perfectly place each item in each quadrant, but we're going to do our best. We want to forward recommendations that we believe are well thought out through, well understood, even if the way they're done still has a little bit of subjectivity within them. So now I'm going to try again and see if I can pull up these slides and actually jump into our first item. Let's see how it goes. All right, can folks see that? Am I presenting again?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. So as I mentioned, the mechanism for ongoing review is one of the 6 items on our list that we are expected to produce recommendations for. Through the subcommittee prioritization meetings, we effectively saw 3 different types of recommendations. One was for like an Office of Nonprofit Partnership or a nonprofit partnership liaison, a staff person, or maybe a small team that lives in DAS. One of the things that we learned throughout this process is a lot of the training materials and templates that agencies are using are produced by and maintained by DAS. So this is almost kind of a central space where a lot of this information around contracting and grants is already living. And so this would be a place to kind of house somebody who's connected to all of those materials, who is able to help drive some of these recommendations that we will see later around improving those processes and tools. And just be somebody that nonprofits can go to when they're struggling, when they're not clear about where information is, when they're trying to understand why something is in a template the way that it is, or they just maybe have some feedback to share on how processes have been going and want to escalate that beyond just the agency or the division that they're working with. Another version of that same recommendation is the Governor's Office of Nonprofit Partnership. So something that's more across agency, whereas the first one would live within an agency. This would be a position that would live across agencies, be a little bit more of that higher level. Still, I think using those internal facing structures and opportunities. How are they supporting agencies in how they work with nonprofits through their contracting and grants? Still kind of be that space for containing a lot of our recommendations going forward. Who's going to be kind of accountable? This would kind of like name an entity that's accountable for that work going forward. And then also at this level would probably provide a little bit of external engagement as well. So maybe working with folks who are not currently working with the state yet on how to develop a partnership with state agencies. And then the last one was a permanent task force, like taking this body, this particular structure as it lives, and just extending the timeline. So we have an expiration date with us here. There are other task force at the state level that don't have an expiration date that live on or transition into some sort of advisory council or things like that, but a permanent body. I think this is an interesting one in the sense that it's a bit more analogous to nonprofit culture, right? Having a volunteer board who oversees bodies of work, like this would be kind of that type of function. This is also, these other two examples, whether in DAS or in the governor's office, would be more paid professionals, right? Folks who have that job, who are in that role, whereas like a permanent task force or a council would be made up likely of nonprofit partners. I do think it is kind of cool that this space in particular is a majority of folks who are in the sector doing the work. And that I think is an interesting perspective. Now, that would mean it doesn't have the same kind of capacity as folks where this is their full-time job doing this work. But those are kind of the trade-offs there. So what I want to kind of start with, I'm going to take this down so I can take a little bit of notes. And we're going to take a little bit of discussion about kind of pros and cons of each of these. What might be helpful, thinking back into ultimately, what do you hope comes out of a lot of this work, right? We discussed a lot of different priorities within those subcommittees, a lot of different bodies of work that are really geared around changing contracts and wages, changing the way funding formulas are done for nonprofit partnerships in order to really put money into those wages, more accountability on payment timelines, more engagement with contractees and grantees, both before and after procurement awards, more transparency and understanding the process, getting tools and templates ahead of time, more ease of administrative reporting on both the financial and program side, right? These are just all the different kinds of things that have come up. So what can these bodies potentially offer in moving those things forward or helping to maintain that work into the future? Ultimately, our recommendation out of this might be one of these three. It might be a combination of two of them. I don't know if a combination of all three would make sense, but maybe a combination of things. So as we start working through kind of the pros and cons of each, feel free to, I think, share what you think might make sense, even if it's like over the course of time. Maybe it starts as the permanent task force, but ultimately you'd like to see an office of nonprofit partnership or something like that. Like, don't be limited by these boxes. These boxes will simply be how I take notes when I take this down. And so I'm going to take this down for now. I'll take any questions that we might have about kind of what we're going to do here. And then I'd like to actually start our pro and con discussion by calling on some of our agency staff for their perspectives. But let's go ahead and start with Danish. I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm also happy to wait if you want to start with the agency folks. Would you prefer to do that?
If you're, are you ready to like jump into your thoughts?
I am.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and then I'll jump it back over to Debbie.
Yeah.
I love to hear a fresh thought, so let's go for it.
So I think, part of it is maybe I'm also fixating a little bit too much on the words, but it's ongoing mechanism for review. And I wanted to expand beyond review because I think it's an ongoing mechanism that has the potential to recast the nature of the relationship between government and nonprofits, or at least goose it along, move it along in a demonstrable way. And so I wanted to suggest that as another way to think about this. And in so doing, almost creating a different culture of cooperation and communication and sort of collaboration. So I mentioned that all to say, I do think it would be a combination of some of those three boxes. I'm not sure any one of those would necessarily capture that. And the whole point of my bringing this up is that I think it took us a long time to get to where we are right now with this kind of current arrangement and all its quirks and all its hassles and headaches and all the good stuff. There's good stuff in there too. But it's going to take us a while to get out of it. So a few administrative fixes in the first year or, some renegotiated rates are good. That's all useful. But what we need to do is create momentum for sustained change over time. And that's why I'm saying it goes beyond review. It's something that's going to take a while, and 1 year isn't going to solve all of that. So some blend of those three boxes is really what jumps out to me.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and invite Debbie, Andre, and Jonathan as kind of our task force members who are also in agencies, you know, in the government. You see these different types of roles and bodies all the time. So if you just want to share a little bit with us, kind of pros and cons of different structures that you've seen in your work.
Great. Did you want me to go first, Mercedes?
Go for it.
Okay. So for me, I tend to agree with what's already been stated. I think some blend of the three would work well. Traditionally, we see sort of a policy champion out of the governor's office, and it may be someone who already holds other policy areas or initiatives, but some sort of champion from the governor's office that sort of sponsors and guides our work. We do typically, if we, you know, I hesitate to sign DAS up for more things, and I will acknowledge that when we have a enterprise-wide initiative, it is common for DAS to take a lead role in terms of coordinating and leading the implementation with the cooperation of many other state agencies. And so I'm happy if one of the agencies who more actively works with nonprofits would prefer to be the lead. But sometimes what we find is agencies that are not DAS are very focused on their own mission, and it's a little bit difficult to utilize resources to do enterprise work in a lead space. So I could go either way on that piece of it, but in terms of actually implementation work and sort of, you know, doing the things, that will probably fall to the agencies. In terms of ongoing task force, I'm a little torn there as to whether that's actually a task force or maybe there's some sort of governing body that is established to provide guidance that would be similarly composed as to what we have now, leadership from state agencies and also from nonprofits to continue the conversation, make sure what we're doing in agencies in terms of implementation is still on track with what the nonprofits are needing. I don't know off the top of my head sort of specifically the difference between a governing group and a task force or a work group, but I think some ongoing presence and connection is necessary. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if Andre ended up making it or if Jonathan, if you'd like to provide any thoughts on these different options.
I think Andre just came in. I just saw.
Oh, we'd really be putting him on the spot.
So yeah, my thoughts on this would be just in terms of my experience in state government and how decisions are made and different decision trees in different state agencies, I would actually opt for the option of a DAS office, a liaison, but as I recognize Debbie's hesitancy in terms of that, I would robustly fund it, and because I think that's a decision-making tree that I think tends to be pretty harmonious with a lot of state agencies, and in terms of the mission of DAS overall, from what I've experienced at least. In terms of governor's office, certainly a contact person there might be helpful. I often view that as a very top-down approach, which perhaps is needed. You know, a permanent task force is a little bit of a contradiction in terms because once it becomes permanent, it's no longer a task force, but it owns a mission that's more long-term, whereas a task force, by its very nature, is often designed to address problems on the ready and come up with propose solutions and approaches. So I wouldn't necessarily go in that direction. That's my 2 cents.
That's helpful. So, yeah, I think permanent task force just came to mind because I do know there are a few other, like there's a home ownership task force and a hunger task force that are permanent bodies. What is a more apt term for something that is permanent? Is it like a council or a committee?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, a task force is supposed to be kind of kinetic. Um, you're actively involved. You're troubleshooting. You're bringing all you can bear on an analysis of problem or problems, and you're coming up with a bunch of propositions. So it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, I think, I think it's great that there's a hunger task force and things like that. Don't get me wrong. It's just maybe these things need to be absorbed more into an agency that's actually has more of a, a greater reach, perhaps, or of the nature. I don't know, but maybe the desire is to. I'm thinking out loud here. Maybe the desire is to have a lot of independence in these task forces that are kind of permanent and the such. Maybe I'm being too attached to keeping the language clean on these titles and designations, and that's kind of a wrong focus.
I think it's still helpful. Like, if we put forward a recommendation, I think we want to use the right term or title for what that is. So if you think of something, Jonathan, that makes more sense is like that we should use like a term of like advisory board or council or something like that, feel free to throw it in the chat. Okay, so I'm not going to call on Andre just yet, just because you just came in, and I do want to let you kind of catch up with the discussion that we're having, but I will come back to you and ask you some questions. But I see Katrina and Bettina's hand up, so we'll go that way. And then Heather, I saw you coming off mute, so I'm going to put you third in the queue. So Katrina, Bettina, and then Heather, go for it.
I hesitate to speak because I feel like I'm raising more of a problem than bringing a solution. And I hate doing that. And at the same time, I'm really thinking about the comments that were made earlier about creating momentum for sustainable change. What makes me kind of hang on that is sort of the ebbs and flows of legislative government, as well as, quite frankly, governorship, right? Like, it could be a priority for one governor, and a couple years later, a few years later, it's not a priority for another. And so I'm kind of leaning toward an external body that is driven by citizens and agencies that are actively engaged in this on an ongoing basis as a space to be the sort of agent for sustainable change. That said, I do hear those comments around creating, like a body that can be, or creating a system or point of contact, either in the governor's office or in DAS or another agency that's sort of responsible for implementing once this group has, moved something forward. I think it's tough, right? Because at the end of the day, the governor is essentially the executive director of the state and can definitely implement things, but priorities change. And that's where we have the, balancing checks and balances with our legislators. But they also change too very frequently. And so I'm torn with what makes the most sense. But I think right now I'm sort of leaning toward an external body, because that work is never going to end. It also changes, but for the most part, it ain't going nowhere anytime. So yeah.
Thank you, Katrina. No, I think that comment is so helpful. I think us thinking about what is the long-term function is helpful in kind of deciding where things live. All right, go for it, Bettina.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about all those earlier comments too. And for the long term, relationship building, collaboration, I think a task force advisory board that is made up of, like similar to the current task force, I think will help elevate the voices over time and, create that longer term change in the relationship. I think without input from the sector, I think we might lose that if it's just a person in DES or in the governor's office. So I feel an advisory type body will be for those longer term changes that we want. And then for the shorter term, we make those recommendations. Are they sitting? Are they sitting well? How they implemented it across agencies? DES could, for me, seems to be a great place because it looks at the overarching, but having someone in the governor's office, I guess, gives it more power if the governor's interested, or if it's on their list of people, then that sort of elevates the power somehow because that's, with the highest office. So for me, yeah, a mix is important, but I think for the long-term change we were seeking after the task force, I would think an advisory type committee that has representation from the sector is really important for that long-term piece.
Yeah, so I think kind of what I'm hearing is we do want like a someone who is in charge, someone who is paid to do this work, but we want that someone to have a board or a council. Again, very nonprofit-y of all of you. Some sort of board or council that is helping them evaluate issues, move things forward, being that larger voice for the rest of the sector as well. Okay, let's go Heather and then Representative Conrad.
Thank you. I'm struggling with the same thing Bettina and Katrina brought up. And I think I just was thinking, what if it was the staff person is in DAS? Because I do think that the shifts in politics and priorities is not the stabilizing factor that we need. We're talking about changing systems and processes. That is not a quick thing. This is going to take years to evolve because we're not going to throw everything out. That doesn't make any sense. We need the structures we have, but continuous improvement takes time. And so I do think that we need that stability of being within a state agency. But I also wonder if, so there was a Senate Bill 623 that passed that was about accountability and ongoing continuous improvement of the public workforce system in Oregon. So what that body does is it's very clear who serves on that body. They get appointed, and then they make recommendations to the governor's office and the legislature. So maybe the way to have connectivity to those is that it's an advisory body to both the legislature, the governor's office, and the state agencies, but the stability happens because I do think you have to understand procurement processes in order to be effective in that position. Because all of us can have these nice conversations, but if we don't understand like the legality and the rules, then we're never going to move the needle. So I also am very not supportive of just doing hire a human because that is very Oregon. We have messed up systems and processes. We're going to hire one person and we're going to set them up by sticking them in a position that's untenable. So they need some level of authority. They need funding. Funding for the position. But maybe it could be an advisory directly to, and there's like an annual report or something like that, or every other year assessment that could happen.
Thank you, Heather. Go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you everybody for the discussion. I don't disagree with anything that I've heard so far, and some of just thinking about going forward and what this looks like, it's going to be that long-term accountability and surviving politics, surviving people change at whatever level, whether it's the legislature or the governor's office. And some of it, I think, is going to come out from what are the other recommendations that we put forward. Right. So if we want somebody to take action, it's going to have to be DAS or the governor's office. If we actually want follow through and somebody with a decision-making ability. If it's just going to be looking at recommendations and monitoring, that's what a task force does, right? Because they have no authority to do anything, to control anything, to command anything. They just report. So it's going to be, what do we want from these other things and recommendations, and where do we want to go with that? The concerns that I've got for, again, looking at bipartisan support and open ears to these recommendations, as soon as we recommend anything for DAS or boards or commissions, it's bigger government and it's going to be scope creep. What does that look like initially? And then what does that look like next biennium and the biennium after? And so really having a defined boundary and scope of duties is going to be critical with whatever comes out of this recommendation to make sure that we get open ears for these recommendations for the rest of it. Because if this is going to be recommendation number one, and we go in with, yeah, we need more government, we need more oversight, we need, 5 more FTE, you're going to turn people off, and they might not really be embracing the rest of the recommendations and reading through that report. Of all these, the one that I least support with the Task Force Advisory Committee, just because it is ongoing. There's not much there. They have no authority. They can report. And that is something that can happen anyway from NAO or any sort of coalition advocacy. There's nothing, there's no reason why the nonprofit sector can't come together and do this outside the legislature and advocate as a coalition. And so, again, trying just to balance that big government with what the expectations on the outcome are going to be. But with that, I do think we need periodic review, and to have, a body that, we, as a legislature, we tell DAS, what, every 6 months, every year, whatever the time frame is, DAS, let us know how the rest of these recommendations are going. Come forward with that report and let us know what is going on. So all the items that are actionable, have we achieved them? Are we making progress? And some of these bigger overarching things, where are we at with that? And so, I think we can have DAS do that. They might need an FTE, they might need something, but it's not going to be big government, but it's going to be that accountability to make sure that the rest of these recommendations are actually going forward. And then DAS can work with the governor's office, and the governor can put forward whatever energy and effort that she desires from her office to make sure that these things happen. Because the nonprofit sector, it's so broad. As soon as we start getting into agriculture, as soon as we start getting into all these different sectors that may or may not be on here, we need to include them all, not just a certain sector of the nonprofit side of things. So those are just my thoughts right now, but we got to have it bounded. We got to have it scoped, and whatever comes in the report, we have to really have it defined and justified to make sure that we get open ears for everything that might follow. So I think the prioritization of these recommendations is also going to be critical going forward.
Thank you very much, Representative Conrad. Just to build on one thing you said about like the nonprofit sector kind of like having its own thing out in the community, that totally exists. If anyone on this call isn't a nonprofit and wants to be part of that, there is a policy leadership council, NAO's board. NAO does, Nonprofit Association of Oregon does also a bunch of like trainings and gatherings. So that space does definitely exist. And I definitely encourage folks to connect with that if they're not already connected. I think one of the other things that you mentioned is around like these justification pieces. I think that is really important, and I do want to make sure that we include that in some of our like debate and dialogue to make sure we're ready. But I also want to uplift kind of where I started at the beginning, that what I have come to realize in this process is our recommendations will be partially unfinished. We will only be able to get so specific because of the information that we do and don't have access to. We are going to be limited on some of the legal viability of some of these things. We've already been notified by DOJ that some of those other questions that we had around legal viability will not be answered in this timeline. So that's why I was mentioning before, we have to try to find our level of comfort with a little bit of guessing and a little bit, well, I don't want to say guessing, educated hypothesis, right? a little bit of grace for ourselves that we may not be as specific as we want to be because of some of the limitations on information and process here. But I am definitely hearing, I think, a lot of consolidation around this concept of, a professional, a person, maybe not just a person, maybe more like a small team of folks, maybe 2-3 people who are also connected to this council, so that it lives in an agency where things can become actionable, but it's also a body that is reflective of the sector, and that is connected to folks outside of the state. So I think we're kind of getting close to something. Katrina, go ahead, and then I'm going to put up notes that I've gotten so far, and then I'm going to circle back, I think, to Andre, maybe Debbie. Go for it, Katrina.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'm also thinking that in as much as we're coming to consensus, maybe not consensus, but some agreement around what a body inside state government should look like, as well as outside. I think we are missing a key piece on the legislative side. Particularly, I was thinking, unless we have a legislative champion who's interested in these topics, or a couple of folks, especially on of either side of the government, where does this live? And so I want to amend, if folks are open for it, I'd like to propose that we amend the recommendations to also include some sort of legislative committee in both the House and the Senate that's responsible for and charged with looking at whatever recommendations are coming out of this nebulous group of people that we're putting together right now, both from the governor's office and on the and this committee, task force, whatever we want to call it. I don't know. What do y'all think?
That makes sense to me. I think that tracks with what I heard. All right, so I'm gonna try again, see if I can put this back up now that I have some notes in it. Representative Conrad, is that a new hand or an old hand?
It's a new hand. I just wanted to respond. I don't know if we talked about how committees are done. They are done at the level of the Speaker and Senate President. And if you'll notice that they sometimes combine, they split, they change, and bills go to different committees based off of a number of different factors. I mean, the one thing that we've done on the General Government Committee, which is Emergency Management, Vets, and General Government, we've done a lot of this. We do a lot of contracting. We hear the procurement. We heard PERS, but this next session, Speaker Fahey, she split business and labor. So labor is going to be hearing a number of things, particularly as relates to PERS. So just, as these recommendations come down, to pick a specific committee, the committee titles and their purview changes depending on who the speaker is and what the needs are. So, broad base it is, in terms of not being assigned to a committee by name, but just broadly, they want the legislature to hear, a report, to hear a summary, whatever that is. Just keep it broad, not specific, because it does change over time. And some of that depends on the speaker, and it's going to depend on the committee chair, whether they're actually going to hear something and what they're going to schedule. And is it going to be during session? Is it going to be during ledge days? Things are a little bit different, whether it's informational or actionable. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm hearing you say we could use like this language of like reports to a legislative body, but we shouldn't try to guess which legislative committee that might be.
Correct. And pick the timeline as well. So if you want it as an informational during ledge days, it's going to look a little bit different than if you try to do it and cram it in during a long or a short session when it may not have the priority and the bandwidth from the legislators because they're working on everything else. So that's why September is always a good time for September ledge days, or, one of the other periods where we commonly have it, whether it's October, November, or those kind of things.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So this is kind of where our notes have landed so far. One, I think it was helpful to hear that. Oh, I'm sorry. Someone want to jump in?
Yeah, I did just have a follow-up question to Representative Conrad's comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So this is, and whoever in the state government can understand or can answer this question, that would be great. It might be Representative Conrad. I am curious how some of the more stable committees end up being what they are, unchanged and pretty consistent year after year. I'm thinking specifically about, like the Housing and Human Services Committee in the House. I know the Senate Housing Committee was created by oh Lord, I can't think of her name right now, but a senator few years ago, I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago. I'm thinking about Ways and Means, some of the subcommittees of Ways and Means that remain pretty stable. Is there a difference between ones that are created by the Speaker or the Senate President? Is there a difference between those ones and these more stable ones that have been around for, at least that I can recall, and I've been doing this work at least 10 years?
Not that I know of. Everything in the House and everything in the Senate is at the pleasure of the Speaker and the Senate President. Everything. There might be some things and rules, and I don't know the Senate side of the House, but Ways and Means, some of these joint committees, because it takes both, you're going to have stability because we have certain functions that we have. Like all budget bills are always going to emanate from the House. So there are some things where you're always going to have it, and that would be one of the other things is as a legislative body, make it a joint. So you get some of the senators on there and you get some of those things. So if it's a subcommittee or a joint or something along those lines, and that way presentation is once, and that you do get both sides, both chambers, as opposed to simply having to present it twice to each side of it. But again, everything's at the pleasure. And so again, looking at for the longevity side of it, 2 or 3 sessions from now, what are the priorities going to be? And it'd be nice if this is a priority. It'd be nice if this has that ongoing conversation. But again, as you said, you need that champion. So that's going to be part of formulation. And if you have a senator and a House member that is somehow involved in part of that, and or if Mercedes, you mentioned the NEL groups. Is there a way to bring in an ex officio legislator as a representative for that, to ask that a legislator from each chamber be appointed to that as ex officio or be that liaison to help with that constant communication and that overlap? So I think there's some other things that we can look at too, just to make sure that there's that open pipeline and you get that champion.
Okay. So these are just some of the notes of where we've kind of landed here. So these were our initial 3 options, and I've added some notes as we've gone. One, I think that was a good piece of information is that enterprise-wide initiatives are often led by DAS. So this, although this would be new capacity we'd be asking for, maybe not necessarily a new muscle, but that, we would need to better understand what well-funded means, like what kind of person or team or size that is. One thing we heard about, at least from the governor's side, is like that kind of produces your policy champion. As we've talked about in this kind of last round, where do the policy champions come from that actually do move these items forward? It's a little bit more obvious if this is a position that's connected to the governor's office. It sounds like less obvious who the policy champion is in these other 2 formats, either DAS or the kind of permanent task force. And then we've had, I think, our most discussion here, like in making this a permanent body, some sort of council or advisory board that's still led by a majority of nonprofit, keeping the same kind of makeup where we have representatives from different agencies, maybe even have some ex officio legislative members still connected, just like we have now. This does need to be connected to somebody with some sort of authority to move priorities forward, right? So whether that's this person, right? A team here or a team there. And then also writing into its kind of mandate that it makes regular reports to the executive as well as to a joint legislative body on a preset schedule. So I'm going to pull this down just for a moment. For all of my buttons. And so I'd love to kind of jump back to Andre, where we started is I kind of asked Debbie and Jonathan as kind of like our agency representatives what their thoughts were on these different types of bodies or these different kind of functions for a mechanism for ongoing review of all these recommendations that are going to move forward and changes. And so I'm just wondering from you, kind of seeing those 3 options, it very clearly sounds we're moving towards a recommendation that's maybe a combination of at least 2 of those. But do you have any thoughts about the pros and cons of different approaches when looking at that kind of list?
Well, thank you. As I was trying to catch up, I think, I tend to agree with a lot of the concerns that were raised by both Rep. Comrade and Katrina. I really think a lot of it initially boils down to what the recommendations are. That really starts to kind of tell the story. I do know, and I'll just say from the governor's office perspective that the governor does have a taste for, wanting to get behind, these types of recommendations as a way for, state government to do business better and work better with, community partners. So, again, I think the issue was raised, though, that lasts as long as this governor lasts. And so, again, depending upon the recommendations and how long it could take to implement certain items, that could also play a factor. I also, would say that in terms of another area for ongoing review and input could be the Governor's Racial Justice Council, as a standing group that could also, play a role in that. And again, I think with the recommendations, it kind of depends on what sort of things are administrative versus legislative. What things could be implemented more or less more quickly, what things would take a little bit more coordination across, different agencies to come to alignment. I I do think DAS is a great place to sort of hold the body of work. I think that would obviously be a discussion, with Barry, for example, on what that could look like, and what they would need in order to sort of be that holder of the work, if you will. But I also do see that the governor's office definitely should play a role, from an advising standpoint. So I think I see where my name comes up in that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the things that as I was listening, that were raised, I tend to agree with. So I do think, though, it really starts with kind of what the list looks like of items, and kind of trying to figure it out from there. That's kind of my initial thoughts on it. But I think the flags that I would have spoken to were already spoken to, so I don't want to reiterate too much. But I think Katrina and Rep. Conrad both raise really good points.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or thoughts? Yes, I see a hand up. Go for it.
I apologize. I think because I got distracted at the beginning, I feel like I missed some stuff, and that's on me. Don't laugh at my question, Mercedes. I guess I'm wondering. I feel like the theme over the last couple of months has been like the severity of the situation we find ourselves in, the kind of some of the internal structures that need changing, the fact that some answers we're not getting as a direct result of like we can't. Is it totally unreasonable to recommend all three of these things, which to me would highlight the fact that we are in a very tough situation, that we have a sector that is dependent upon by the government, and that sector is hurting and it's not going to be able to do its job. So that's what's coming up for me. I don't know if that's fair. um and I appreciate that at the planning meeting I sort of had my aha of like, okay, recommendations are not policy. And so I guess I don't want just one of these things. I want all three because there's a lot of issues that need to be fixed. So that's my summary.
So I think I kind of understand how to write a recommendation for the council and feeling that that's feeling kind of clear that some sort of permanent advisory council. Then who it connects to is the question, right? And we kind of have this like DAS governor's office thing. I'm hearing like functionally, like if what we're really concerned about is process, is like administrative process, things that may not even need legislation that currently today exists without legislation. Having an administrative lens towards that kind of process is a very strong way to go. But anything that then would need legislative engagement then doesn't necessarily have an obvious champion anymore. And so that's why I'm kind of hearing like that balance with like the governor's racial justice council, right? Connecting back to the governor's office in some form or fashion. Whether or not that is an office that then lives there or not, I think is a great question. And I wonder how we, I think part of this is an absence of government org chart, maybe, right? And like where these different types of roles tend to live or exist. So I think I'm going to pull up what I've written now based on listening to the group. And then I think I'm going to call for a red, yellow, green and see how close this feels to something that would make sense. Can people see that?
Yes.
Okay. So the recommendation would read that to have a mechanism for ongoing review, the state should establish a permanent advisory council that has the same or similar makeup as the current task force. The nonprofit advisory council would annually report to a joint legislative committee. The council would share recommendations and report, that was supposed to be an S, with the racial justice council. An Office of Nonprofit Partnership would be established in DAS to staff the advisory council and support the implementation of recommendations approved by the governor and the legislature. So this is what I think I have heard in this discussion. So I'm going to leave this up, which makes it harder for me to see the chat, but I want to leave this up and I want to ask for folks to put in the chat how this is resonating with you. Is this a green for you? Do you feel like this has landed? Is this a yellow for you? Like you feel like it's close, but you want more discussion? Are you at a red where you're like, this is totally off. I don't think this is what we've been saying at all. And I will call on the reds first to share and then the yellow. So if you feel very, very strongly, please feel free to use that red. And I'll leave this up for a few seconds and then I'll take it down so that I can see what the votes look like.
Mercedes, I can't use my chat, but this is Marianne and I vote green.
Okay.
I'm a yellow.
Yellows. Okay. Okay, good, good. I'm not seeing any reds yet, but I also don't see all of the votes yet. I think there's maybe a couple people who haven't thrown a comment in the chat yet. Okay, lots of yellow. So we're not ready for a vote yet, but let's go ahead and let's check in with our yellow. So the first yellow I see Felicita and then I see Katrina. Do you want to share a little bit about why you're in the yellow right now?
Can we also ask Helen?
We're going to ask everybody who's yellow. They're just the first ones.
I feel like I already stated my opinion, so I don't want to be repetitive, and I want to hear from other folks. But it's close to green, and I appreciate your active listening skills, Mercedes. I'm so envious the way you combined what everyone's thinking. So thank you.
So for you, it needs to say something more explicitly connected to the governor's office.
I mean, I think I want something that says it's going to have teeth. And I get that this is a recommendation and we're not writing a policy. And so I think the intention is there. I think our other recommendations will speak to why we would need these positions. So I'm close. I'm not going to fight it.
All right, Katrina and then Helen. What's getting you at a yellow?
Yeah, well, so a couple of things. The word a joint committee is is throwing me off just because I don't want it to land just anywhere. But I'm also torn because, to Representative Comrade's point a little bit earlier, we do need a champion almost every single time we're pushing a bill through. I just feel like I just feel like some dedicated somebody somewhere in the legislature is going to be really important. And so, hate to throw a wrench, but now I'm thinking like, well, shit, is it the is it LFO? Like, oh, excuse my French. I'm sorry, that was really inappropriate. Is it LFO? Is it yeah, I'm trying to think where in the legislature can this live so that sure, as interests change, as champions change, there's a space for us to continually talk about it no matter what. And the legislature is a pretty high concern for me. Um, I just yeah, trying to figure out what it is keeping me from being able to say yes, I'm ready to vote.
Yeah, and I would
Okay.
say that my yellow is a combination of Felicita and Katrina's, which is just I can completely live with this, and thank you for synthesizing everyone's feedback. In an ideal, like full green, completely support recommendation, it would have more of an enforcement mechanism, I think. But that might not be where we realistically are. So I'm very much okay to live with this, but a true green for me would be something that would be pretty hard to ignore. And I feel like there's possibility that there could be a lot of work put into this as it currently stands, and it may not go anywhere. So I would hate to see that happen.
And that's a good, it is a good kind of like thought, where, if not here, where do we establish some like, you can't just ignore this, right? Like that's what I feel like I'm hearing is like, where do we establish that you can't just ignore this? And if it's not here, then it has to be somewhere else.
Well, honestly, I feel like it needs to be in all of them. I think that's what I'm trying to communicate. Like, it needs to be in the governor's office, it needs to be outside, and it also needs to live in the legislature so that nobody can ignore it. Not one person anywhere.
Heard. Okay. Let's keep moving down the line. Tamara, you're a yellow green. So if you want to share, feel free to unmute and give us your thoughts. Otherwise, Jonathan, we'll also hear from you.
I would say for me, it's just a combo of what I heard Felicita and Katrina saying, teeth, and is it reaching far enough? But that's why I was yellow green, which I guess is like a baby puke. Sorry about that.
Jonathan, do you want to share any more about your yellow status?
No, I mean, if you recall, I was mentioning that I thought it'd be wise to house it in the DAS office and fund it robustly. And the only comments that came in after that I was hearing that were kind of supporting that, or supporting kind of another reason for that, has been people talking about how politics change. Other things change are the economy, budgets. These things, they go in large macro cycles sometimes, and I think if it's housed in DAS, permanently funded, then the winds of change won't be able to affect it as much. And a lot of the good work that's been done through this task force might not, it might be more influenced by the political winds and the economic winds. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Andre and then Ganesh.
Jonathan pretty much took the words out of my mouth. It's just thinking about some of those other external factors. And then also just, I guess, more on the timing. I think one of the first things I heard when I came on was about continuity and maintaining momentum. And so, hiring staff, putting together a team to manage the implementation, potentially trying to advocate for a place in the legislature, for this to live. Those things are, kind of just push implementation further down the road. And so just also thinking about the time it would take to establish the coordination amongst several entities, and what that does in terms of keeping the focus on, actually putting these things into action. So just wanted to flag that as kind of, and like, there will be some level of that no matter what, but I think that's just, important to keep an eye on how much of that, there's a tolerance for.
Mhm. Danish, go ahead. If you want to share your yellow thoughts.
Yeah, I reiterate some of what's been said. Teeth, dedicated champion, hard to ignore, build it for the long haul. All these points make sense to me. The piece that I would add is that I still think there's something here beyond process. I know process is our primary focus. We want to change the rules of the game for sure, but I think we also have an opportunity to change the game itself and change the nature of the relationship that we have with government. And Oregon could lead the way. We can wrap our hands around this in a demonstrable way. So I think that long haul requires being integrated in as many places as possible. So I agree that it is, kind of a combination of all of the above.
Okay. Anyone else at a yellow that I missed? Or anyone just, maybe you were green and now you have a thought.
Yeah. This is Bettina. I had a verbal yellow, and I think my heartache is around the office in DAS and what that means, and really that it has to have teeth, it has to have some description. I just worry that the office, people say that costs money, but I think that we just have to take some time to describe what we think the office's purpose is, so it is effective both strategically and also operationally for implementation. So otherwise, I worry that we just have an office and people think that's the win. When they don't have teeth, then it's not really a win. Yeah.
Representative Conrad has his hand up.
Thank you. I've got a question for Debbie at DAS. Does DAS have any other ongoing procurement improvement processes? So as we look going forward, is there anything that we can modify and put this in so that DAS has it already embedded in other work that they have going on, in addition to some of the other recommendations? But just trying to figure out how we can actually, so some of their other recommendations hopefully will come out, will be actionable. And to Andre's point, administrative versus legislative. And how can we take all those administrative things and assign it to work that is ongoing, so that I look at, to the other points, how long will it take to actually take action on anything that we recommend? We're going to be looking at years out. If they got to hire new folks, get position descriptions, do all those other kind of things, if there's any technology thing, we're looking at years out. How can we tie into something that's an already ongoing process that we can modify and get things done a little bit sooner? So I'm just curious, what other procurement processes or things that does DAS have that we can look?
You bet. Thanks, Representative. Actually, we do have, I would say, the most current and active improvement project that we have going on has to do with procurement equity. We did a disparity study on the state's results, statewide results in terms of contracting with businesses owned by women and people of color. And we do have an office that stood up to support implementation and change efforts with regard to how the state approaches contracting with small businesses. So we do have an individual that we hired into that office with a specific lens with nonprofit experience in anticipation that we may be responsible for some of this work on an ongoing basis. There are also some data analysts and some policy folks in that office. It's pretty well staffed. And so I think as we are coming up to speed and perhaps looking to add some additional bench strength, we do have a few resources in place that could get the ball rolling, and one in particular that we may be able to rely on to lead some of the work. Does that help answer your question, Representative?
It does, and I appreciate that. And you said one of the things I was looking for is to give this strength in the legislature and with groups. If you've got something going on with the business community, then we add in including nonprofits so that we broaden out that scope of work a little bit better, and we tie it into something that we know is always going to be going through the legislature, which is procurement processes and business practices, and that we get this going together. And I think that gives it some strength and some resiliency through time, which I think is one of the most important things. So thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that.
You bet. One other thing I will mention, DAS is working with the governor's office with Andre and his team to put together a legislative concept. Right now, it's really focused on standing up this small business program and giving us some ability to set some goals or targets, but it's possible if this body of work is ready and we have recommendations that through the legislative process, since we're opening up that statute, we hope to get support to open that statute, that we could potentially utilize that same concept to maybe add any legislative or statutory changes that might be needed for the nonprofit community. And I'm sort of speaking in this open forum without having connected with Andre on that. But I'd be curious to see what he thinks and if that might be a vehicle that could be helpful in the next session.
Could you say what it was called again, Debbie? Do you have like a short name for it?
We have a legislative concept to support DAS's desire to stand up a small business procurement program.
Yeah, and that work it really comes out of the state disparity study work, and so it was aligned around addressing some of the recommendations from that. So it's an interesting thought, Debbie. I think we'd have to really have something sooner rather than later, though. That work is moving pretty rapidly, so I think it would really depend on what we might consider adding in there. So hadn't given that a thought yet, but there's a possibility for sure.
Mercedes, just one more thing. I'm seeing some comments from agencies that are absolutely accurate. DAS does not do a lot of grant making, as this task force learned through many presentations. And so this is not something that DAS could do without strong partnership with other state agencies. And I will also point back to my earlier comments that if there is an agency that is better equipped to lead this statewide effort, we at DAS would not, feel badly about that. We just also recognize that often it does fall to DAS to lead enterprise work. And I fully acknowledge that we do not currently work in this realm for grants very much.
Yes, I definitely think my kind of goal with using DAS was more the fact that not all, but a lot of the agency staff said we use those templates, we use those training materials, we use those handbooks, right? Because that's where it lives. So it's not DAS as a grant maker, it's DAS as a holder of those tools that everyone else is using. That's the reason that I gravitated towards that, but agree. And so here is, let me see if I can try it again. I miss my big screens. But let's try this one again. And now this is what it looks like after getting more of the yellow discussion. So we've gotten more refinement here. So we're back to, so the state should establish a permanent advisory council. The council should share recommendations and reports with the Racial Justice Council. Concurrent report delivered to the Senate and House leadership and LPRO, the Office of Nonprofit Partnership with INDAS, and then this kind of like specification here that funding would need to ensure a minimum level of support to ensure ongoing process improvement across state agencies with procurement, contracting, and grant programs as a core efficiency measure. So basically, if you defund this, you no longer care about efficiency. That's where I was trying to go with some teeth. How do I turn it back off? Sorry. Okay. Wait, I probably should have left it up there. So I'm gonna put it back up in a second, and then I'm gonna ask folks to do again our vote of the green, yellow, red. So if the language is looking a little bit better now with a little bit more specificity now, how do we feel about where this language is? Is this showing? I can't even tell. I don't think it is. There it goes. Okay.
It is.
Okay. So jumping back into your chat, let's try again with the green. You're feeling like this has added more language that's needed, gotten more specific. Yellow, not
I'm
feeling
so
great, but
sorry.
interested.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yes, please.
Is sharing recommendations and report to the Racial Justice Council, does that cover the governor's office somehow? Because concurrent report delivered to Senate and House leadership and LPRO, not the governor?
Yeah, so this was based on something that Andre had said about like
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. That makes sense.
And the governor attends all Racial Justice Council meetings and leads that group.
So green, if this is feeling like you're ready to try to take a vote and see where we are. Yellow, you're not loving it, but ready for a vote to see where folks are landing. Red, you have something critical that you want to add or discuss. Let's see how it's looking. Okay. And to the question, I will copy and paste it into the chat. If folks want to keep looking at it, I don't know if it's going to come out funky coming out of my.
I took a photo, and so I'm digesting, and that helps me.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
To Dinesh's comment, can we add something about ongoing advocacy that would satisfy him?
Let's see.
Yeah, if I'll jump in on that. I mean, more than just satisfying me, I guess it has to make sense to this group. And I, keep coming back to the thought that this opportunity is not going to come up very often, where we are taking stock of, again, the rules of the game. And what I'm trying to say is, let's go beyond just the rules. Let's go beyond review. Let's go beyond process and think about how that can be serve as building blocks for changing the nature of the relationship between nonprofits and government. It's just not going to happen in the next legislative session, and it's not going to happen in 2 legislative sessions. So again, not to take away the bulk of our focus, but I'm saying add that on there. That's teeth in my mind, is if we have somebody who is a champion, who is saying, what about this? Or have you considered these other issues? Or who's at the table? That's a form of ongoing advocacy that goes beyond rule changes, or looking at overhead amounts. I don't want to sell ourselves short, but I think the gist of what's been proposed is good. I'd love to see it go a little bit farther.
So I'm seeing mostly green, so I'm gonna throw this up one more time. I have added some language here, which I think is getting to that, not just the process, but actually like thriving and improving partnerships. So I'm gonna put this back up, and this time I'm gonna call for a vote. Do I have to make like a formal motion and everything, Debbie? Do you know? Or can I just be like, I, as the chair, move this recommendation for a vote and just do it by myself? Or what do you think?
I actually don't know. I guess it wouldn't hurt since we don't know, it wouldn't hurt to do it. I don't know.
Okay. Let's give it a go. So I would like to move this as our first formal recommendation under mechanism for ongoing review. Do I have a second?
I second it. This is Marianne.
Thank you, Marianne. So the last pieces I added here was, in addition to progress on contracting and grant reform, also improving thriving partnerships with community-based organizations. And then again, down here, ongoing process and CBO partnership improvement across state agencies. So that was trying to get at that last comment about not just process, but actually culture of partnership. If you are feeling good about this recommendation, please put a yes in the chat. If you do not support this recommendation, please put a no, and we do need a majority vote to finalize this as our first recommendation.
Give a verbal yes. This is Bettina.
Thank you, Bettina.
Mercedes, do you want me to write that in the chat so it's on the record?
Sure. Thanks.
This is Marianne. I can't vote in the chat, but my vote is yes.
Heather, would you also note that? I'm going to try to take this down so I can take a look at the vote. Oh, and I guess I should vote. Oh my gosh. I do still have to vote. Oh my gosh, y'all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 yes votes.
Sorry, Marianne, I spelled your name wrong.
And I think that's it, folks. That looks like a majority vote. That looks like our first recommendation done and buttoned up. Round of applause, everybody. Yay. We just have to do that now like a dozen or so more times. No problem.
Mercedes, were there, for the record, were there any no votes? Or was it unanimous yes?
I am not seeing any no votes in the chat. So I think everyone currently present and voting has voted yes, and we have both a majority and unanimous yes. So I actually I want like a little applause or something. It feels so quiet. It felt like such a big deal. Good job, everybody. Okay, so that is basically our process moving forward. I will bring in our next meeting a few of those, and we will do as many as we can. And then in our August meeting, we'll do the last ones. We'll also start doing some of our writing. I'm meeting with the person who's going to help us do our writing. As I kind of mentioned in the chat to Heather, is like we're going to have our recommendations that are going to be in our executive summary that can only be 2 pages, but we can also add attachments. So when we start wanting to think about like that kind of scope of work of these bodies, we can also think about some of the public comment we received, some of the reports we received, some of the comments from agency staff we've seen in here, as it may be things we want to have in an attachment of additional considerations for these moving these items forward. And we can then kind of expand a little bit more by maybe adding some things from those additional pieces of material that we've received over time. I think that, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe we are not going to be able to do the budget presentation because I think they needed to go before 11. Is that right?
Yes, I do see that Kate hopped in at some point here, but I know she has a hard stop at 10:45. So maybe I would defer to her if she thinks she could get anything done in 10 minutes. Hi, Kate, there she is.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, hi, I'm Kate Nass. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I heard you had some questions about budget and kind of the process, and I'm happy to be here for you to have a quick call or a quick conversation, but I do have a hard stop. I'm have to run into an appointment at 10:45, so kiddo thing.
Okay.
So if it works, I can go pretty quick, and then know that that might just be the start of the conversation, and we may need to do follow-up later. I'm totally open. You're getting me pretty casual today.
Sure. Why don't we have you go ahead and tell us what you can tell us in the time that you have, and if it makes more sense for us to have you back, we'll work on that.
I love it. That's great. Thank you. So yeah, thank you. I think Amy's doing slides for me because I'm out in the parking lot right now. But just really quick, the basics of state budgeting. And I'm sorry if this is repetitive for those of you who know our budget process, but we start when we are building the next biennium's budget, we start with the current authorized budget for current biennium. So if you think about it for the one that we're about to build for the 25-27 budget, I call it a jumping off point. So we're jumping off budget for the 23-25 period as of the February session. So that's all of the budget adjustments that took place in 2024. And then that starts as kind of like your base and jump off point. We then project out what it would cost to do what we currently are doing in the next biennium. And then that is called current service level. That's worked. That is worked along with the Legislative Fiscal Office, so we kind of all have the same base understanding. It's really meant to be a point in time projection. We know things change. We know caseloads change or different information changes, but at that point, we have to do some sort of point in time projection. That work is happening right now for the 25-27 biennium. So just kind of as a timing, that is kind of kicks off in earnest in the spring of the even calendar year for the next budget period. And then we have budget decisions that are based on policy option packages, or also known as POPs, that are like policy budget changes that would make either go up or down from that current service level budget. So Amy, if you can go to the next slide. There we go. Yeah. So I kind of want to spend a little time on current service level. So current service level is it is a projection, like I said, a point in time of what we are currently doing and how much it will cost into the next year. The current service level is developed based on enterprise-wide parameters that are set out in budget instructions that are released in March of the even number year. And so there's really specific guidance that we give the enterprise as a whole. So for example, what inflation rate to use, because we don't want to use different inflation rates across the enterprise, because that feels like we're not treating programs the same or similar in the way that we need to in order to acknowledge like what those costs are. So we'll do a standard inflation rate for like goods and services, and then we'll do a professional services rate for those programs that are kind of more wage-based or largely wage-based. We also have set guidance on what can be phased in or phased out as like one-time costs that are one-time investments, and what kind of is a roll-up cost. So let's say a legislature funded a program, but it didn't start until partway through the current budget period, then we'd have to phase in the 2-year to make it a 2-year cost. There's adjustments for mandated caseload. That's caseloads that are for court-ordered, federally mandated caseloads, not necessarily those that are state required. And then we also do fund shift. So like if the federal government is a funding partner with us, we will fund shift based on federal resources. If there's one-time funding that's going away, federal funding going away, and we depending on the program, we'll shift it to the other funds or general fund. So I think the main thing for current service level is this is really set to be a somewhat across the board enterprise look, so that we have a good tool to jump off from. Again, it's kind of effectively that base point, and then budget policy decisions are made based on kind of going up or down from that current service level. And then my last slide is really quick. It's just going through agency request budgets. Those are basically where an agency puts forward the budget request along with the governor that includes those up or down policy changes for the from current service level. Sometimes there's what's called a revenue reduction package, and that's like if an agency is maybe supported by other funds, but there's not enough other funds resources, revenues to support the current service level, the agency would put forward a policy package that shows how they would come back into revenues, and then maybe put another policy package forward that shows like what a revenue increase would buy, and buy those reductions back is how it typically works. So I know that was like the highest level budget presentation overall that I've ever done, and but I'm hoping that gets a little bit of an idea of how we develop budgets. And then I'm totally missing out completely on the governor's budget, which is released by December 1, and then also the legislative budget process. So this was really focused on the agency request budget and current service level budget.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're going to end up with maybe in our next meeting more discussion about budget pieces, because I think one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how do we get CBOs included in the inflation adjustment, because we learned that they're not. And so we're trying to figure out how do our goods and services get into that goods and services calculation, especially where wages are concerned.
Really, we work with the Office of Economic Analysis and the state economist on setting what those inflation rates are. So it's not like, I don't know if they'd be not included. It would just be that we are looking at the overall wage costs for our region is what we're looking at.
Yes, what we learned was that when agencies get inflation adjustments, they don't pass those on to the nonprofit contractors or grantees.
I see.
That's what I meant. We're not included.
Different.
That's where we're trying to get included. Yeah.
I'm like, well, we do. I think you're in the depth for what your wage pressures are. I can see what you're saying there. I'm sorry. Yes, for sure.
So we may have more follow-up questions as we may get more follow-up questions for you when we get into that piece. Lisa, I think I saw your hand up, and I think we might be able to sneak in one question to Kate before she's got to run.
You said exactly what I wanted to say. Thanks, Mercedes.
Oh, great. You guys are of like mind. Great minds think alike. I love it. Well, thank you for having me, and just kind of coordinate with Amy and Debbie, and I'm happy to come back or have somebody from my team come back.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay, so now we're coming to the part of the meeting where I also have to leave. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to wrap early. So everyone will get about an hour back in your day. Make sure you get away from your computer, step away, look at something else other than a screen. And just, one more preview again for July and for August. One for July, our agenda setting meeting got moved up to June 27th. So if you would like to get like a sneak peek into what some of these proposed languages, the proposed language might be on some of the recommendations, we're going to talk about those in the agenda planning meeting. So feel free to come to that on the 27th. You can just email Amy if you haven't been coming to those, but you want to get added to that invite. We're also looking at having the Nonprofit Association come and do a short presentation in July on the research that they were doing on nonprofit wages. They're going to give us some concrete data, I think, on how far away average wages for nonprofit workers are, who is being impacted by the depression of wages within the sector, to really help us kind of keep building the recommendations as we move forward. So we'll do more of this decision-making and prioritization process. We didn't quite get to the plotting today because we wanted to try to see if we could fit in a little bit of that time. But I think what we'll do, and definitely what I felt like I heard from people, is like the importance of some of these things is dependent on some of the other things. So maybe we'll try to actually get through a few of our recommendations before we try to do the plotting on the quadrant, just so folks feel like they're doing it in the broader context. But so July and August, it's this is how we'll put our process together. If you are feeling at all uncomfortable with this process, felt like you couldn't really figure out how to interject and put in some of your comments, please, I was going to say reach out to me, but you can't do that. Please let Amy know, because I really want to make sure that we accommodate folks. And if we need to introduce maybe like a survey tool or something else that more meets your communication style, I want to be able to do that. So if you had any feedback about this that it didn't really work for you, or you weren't feeling like you were able to engage, please let Amy know. Or if you'd like to unmute now, we have I can stay on for another 10 minutes. Feel free to unmute now if you want to do a little bit of a debrief. But I'm going to let folks go now. Thank you all so much. I'll see you in July. Really looking forward to getting through the rest of our recommendations together. Thank you all so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Mercedes. Thanks, everyone.
I think that's our best meeting yet.
Because we got to do stuff this time.
And I think we got to consensus, which is fabulous.
Yeah, it did. It did. It felt like we really consolidated ourselves pretty strongly and got there. So hopefully we can do more of that going forward. And thank you, Marianne, for I'm sorry I wasn't able to let you know ahead of time that I might need to dip out early. Turned out okay. I didn't have to throw any facilitation at you, but thank you for being here.
I actually loved the budget thing she did. It was very simple and I got it.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.